And there it is.
It's caucus time.
It's caucus time. It is noon. It's Thursday. It's almost noon. It's kind of just past. We had a couple. It's how it always is. But you know what, folks?
Afternoon, yeah.
We are trying to break the internet today because we have both. I don't know what to do with this. I can't pick fate. That's not true. I can pick favorites, but I'm not going to. You guys have to guess. No, I'm kidding. We got Mr. Andrew Muller on with us today, and it's not because Mason's gone. Mason, you're here. So this podcast is going to be a fun time because all three of us have never actually been on at the same time before. I'm looking forward to it.
We should have both canceled on him, Andrew. And he's
that would have been good.
Free, and it's just him alone.
The problem is he could do it, and then we would look dumb.
Yeah. I do it 2 hours a day. No, that would actually be very easy in the sense of today because, folks, the reason we have Andrew on is we have a very specific topic to get into, and he was actually over in Azerbaijan 3 weeks ago now.
About 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I've lost track of time because I've just discovered there's nicotine in potatoes, and I now know why I had such a rough time last week at Thanksgiving. Which, there you go. Merry Christmas. May we first officially say it. We're past Thanksgiving now here on Unauthorized Caucus. Wherever you are, if you're live streaming with us now on Rumble, hit the big green button. Subscribe to the channel. You can like this video, share it with a friend, let them know that we're streaming this live. If you're a podcast listener after the fact, as always, those come out on Friday. Go to unauthorizedcaucus.com, sign up there. You'll get the email notification. Also, all the notes and resources. Today, there will be resources aplenty. And then, of course, wherever you listen to your podcasts, leave us a 5-star rating and review. We greatly appreciate it. You can just directly support us, too, on Rumble, on Substack, at our website, whichever you choose. We will be very grateful for that support. But today, we want to talk about the climate and how the climate is trying to kill us because we're trying to kill the climate or whatever it is that the left tells us, except it's not about that. No, it's all about oil, good old-fashioned oil and gas and all the corrupt deals that happen. The United Nations Climate Summit, COP29, the 29th Climate Summit, happened in Baku, Azerbaijan, just a couple of weeks ago. Andrew, you were out there with your boss, with Alex Newman. Both of you, the Liberty Sentinel cowboys, were running around the deserts of Eastern Europe? Is this technically what we would call Azerbaijan, or is it Western Eurasia?
Probably the latter. You know, it's they've gone under rebranding, so I think they're still figuring it out.
Oh man. Well, folks, if you weren't following him, you should. Liberty Sentinel, also the New American. That's who you guys were out there reporting for, was the New American. But this is something I really wanted to have you on. I knew we would take a break here for Thanksgiving, but I would love for you to just over the course of this podcast, give us a sense. And we've got a lot of questions. We've got all your reporting pulled up in front of us. I want to talk about all of the things that you guys encountered because we have two huge dynamics going on here. And correct me if I'm wrong, and then just give us a kind of tell us the lead up of how you guys got into this to go over there, because I have to imagine that they know who you are at this point. But according to some of your videos, apparently there are a lot of people who have no idea who Alex Newman is. Apparently he's a super fan in my house because we know Alex and everything he does. But he wasn't recognized. You weren't. But you've got the forces at play, the traditional climate craziness, where the left is trying to convince us, oh my gosh, man-made climate change is ending the earth, cataclysmic things, and we have to turn and worship the sun and stop carbon emissions. This nonsense, which some people subscribe to and other people use, and those people are giant globalist corporations and governments trying to bilk the West for money or trying to make their own oil and gas deals or whatever it is, but all of them know it has nothing to do with global warming, global cooling, CO2 emissions, or nonsense like that. So there's really these two different factions. They both meet at the COP Climate Summit from the UN, and you guys were there to talk about it all. How in the world did you get yourselves a path to Baku, Azerbaijan? Where did the genesis of this start? Please feel free to share all the details, except what you can't, because we don't want you to reveal sources so you can keep this.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. As always, it's a pleasure. And we were accredited journalists. I actually have my little press pass here. I keep them because they're fun. And I always try to make a little face when they take my picture so I can look sarcastic. I don't know if you could see it on this one. The light might be too bright, but I have a picture of it on my X. I'm making a very sarcastic looking face, disgruntled looking face, because I get to. But yeah, you know, the process for applying to these, you know, this is public knowledge, so I can share that, is that you have to actually have, and this is what I think a lot of good journalists lament, people who are independent journalists, things like that, you have to have like a brick and mortar official media company behind you to be able to attend. So if you are really popular and you have a lot, million followers on X, and you have a podcast that reach millions of people a year, but maybe you don't have an official media outlet behind you, you don't have a brick and mortar office, there's a great chance the UN will not accept you as press. So, the New American, of course, has headquarters and everything. So they give us an assignment letter. We get to go at the UN's pleasure to these COP events. This was the 29th, as you mentioned, COP29, and that stands for Conference of the Parties. This is where they discuss every year how they're going to save the planet, and it always revolves around money for some reason. And every year they get money, but every year it's not enough money, and everything gets worse. So maybe next year we'll get more money and things will get better. That's usually the talking points and how that works. This year they wanted up to $20 trillion. They were very upset when they only got 1.3 trillion, which is pocket change. If you weren't aware that 1.3 trillion is not enough to change the whole course of the planet, then they were very disappointed with that. But it's interesting. I said they go under rebranding in Azerbaijan, and we can kind of start there because setting the stage of where this conference was hosted actually kind of tells the tale in a sense. They typically have these events in different regions of the world every year. In the UNFCCC, which is their climate organization for the United Nations, in their charter, which spells out how they go about these conferences, they have regions that have to be host nations for COP every so many years. So this year it was that kind of Middle East, West Asia, south of Russia, that kind of area was, on the dock to be a host nation. And to the south of Azerbaijan, you have Iran, you have hostile Middle Eastern nations, of course, to the north, you have Russia, and, then there's Ukraine and everything in that region. So there wasn't too many popular options for the woke people to be happy. So they're like, let's pick the one no one's heard of, maybe the one that's going to be a little bit of a educational experience for people. So they picked Azerbaijan. And I got to be honest, I was homeschooled, we did geography and things like that, but Azerbaijan slipped through the cracks in my brain when they said, hey, it's in Azerbaijan. I'm like, what in the world? Who's that? So I didn't know what it was. I looked it up. I found out it's a small little country that borders the Caspian Sea. It actually was removed from the Soviet Union in 1991. Now they're saying, we're a Muslim, they're Middle Eastern. They kind of try to act like, Qatar or a country like that. They're kind of trying to rebrand and rekindle that Arab heritage, but it doesn't really work because there's a whole bunch of Soviet, atheist, Marxist looking art. There's no mosques, there's no churches. Everyone dresses in black. It's a very depressing. So they're having a little trouble there. But the interesting part was that they pretty much redirected the whole country to this convention center. They made everything look nice leading up to the convention center, kind of like a yellow brick road style mentality. So you'd get to the airport was pristine. You'd drive to the event center, that road was pristine. You'd get to the COP convention arena, and it was decked out and it looked incredible. And if you stayed in that universe for the whole duration of your trip, you would have thought Azerbaijan was this flourishing, beautiful Arab nation. But then you go literally 5 minutes down the street in any direction that's off the yellow brick road, and you start to see packs of wild dogs, literally kids setting up wooden carts to sell fish, cars that you didn't even know could moving on the highway, just somebody rigged and got functioning. So there was absolute, the word that only really suits it is facade, an absolute facade that they put up. And that's important for two reasons. One, it proves that this whole thing isn't about climate. It's not about bettering the planet. It's about just putting up a good front to get the cash and leave. And two, it shows that no matter what, when we talk about these climate things, there's always going to be people who are believers and people who really believe that the climate is in bad shape, that we need to change it. And then there are the people who are just using this as a front. And those are some of the things we observed when we were there. So when you watch the reporting of this, and a lot of American media reported on it, but they didn't send anybody to the COP to be able to report. CNN did a lot on COP, but it was just articles, just general recycling of news. They didn't have anybody that I know of on the ground there. And a lot of companies did that. And they paint a picture of the world's failing. The global leaders aren't doing enough. We need more money. And that was really the big message. Every year there's a theme with these COPs. And this year it was money. And I think that they were expecting that they would get a lot of it from Joe Biden, because he walks around and hands out money like it's going out of style. But instead they got no money, relatively speaking. And when you compare it to what they were asking for. So it kind of was like a funeral wake. And Mark Morano, who's the publisher of Climate Depot, he's got some brilliant work. There were 70,000 people at COP. We met up with him when we were in a room with Mark Morano. That was probably the nucleus of all the people right there in one spot at this event out of 70,000 people who didn't agree with the narrative. So that was a little crazy. But he called it a funeral wake. He said Donald Trump killed and threw a wet blanket on the COP. And I think that's true, because a whole bunch of countries, after Donald Trump won, pulled their delegations and didn't attend. Argentina pulled their delegation after Donald Trump won, said, you know what, we're not going to attend this summit. Nothing ever happens with them anyway, so they pulled out. The French actually pulled a big chunk of their delegation. The United States had an extraordinarily weak presence at this COP. There were no celebrities. There's always like a Greta Thunberg or a Harrison Ford or a Leonardo DiCaprio or a Meryl Streep style figure at these events. There wasn't one this year. So this was kind of the COP that never was. And I think that that's because Donald Trump and what he cast on this, because he got us out of the Paris Agreement, which is really the pivotal climate agreement that the United States was involved in. And I think that these people recognize they need to hunker down, weather the next 4 years, and hope that in 2028, the sun starts to rise. But I'm hoping that this is actually the beginning of what we should dub a Clegxit, a climate exit from the global stage. And I think that that is achievable if we could get major countries, particularly Argentina, Hungary, the United States, and a few others, to say, you know what, this is a fraud, this is a scam, we're not going to be involved in this. If they could pull out under the leadership of Donald Trump, maybe even get out of the UNFCCC climate agreement altogether, which would be far more permanent than pulling out of the Paris Agreement. If they could do that as just a start, I think they could cripple the climate movement for the foreseeable future. But ultimately, and we can get into some more specifics here, but what we saw was an absolute facade from the United Nations linking up with Azerbaijan. These are countries who don't care about climate. They care about globalism, and they set up a front. And that's why I was trying to describe a little bit about the yellow brick road and the nice roads. They don't really care that they were hosting the climate summit in a petro state whose, biggest export is oil. 90% of Azerbaijan's exports are oil. Behind the walls that they had put up around the highways, and just even 10, 15 kilometers away from the convention center, where thousands of oil derricks actively rigging for oil. They don't care about that because, again, it's not about the climate. It's about globalism. So ultimately, the American people need to recognize that this is a money laundering scheme. It's to rob the middle class of the little bit of wealth they have left, to transfer it to the global elites, to the global South, because we wicked white people invented automobiles and airplanes and AC. And as a punishment for blessing the world with that, we now have to pay up, fund globalism, and lift up impoverished nations to the same level as the United States and Canada and China and England and France and the rest of that lot, because we have sinned and we need to pay our climate reparations, if you will. So that's what they discuss at all of these things, and they use the veneer of saving the planet to virtue signal and make themselves look righteous. But they actually have no plans at all for saving the planet or fixing sea levels. I mean, they have experts and scientists and booths, and when you go up and talk to these people, it's let's first get the $1 trillion, or let's first get the $20 trillion, and then we can talk about the specifics of how we'll actually fix this. But it's irrelevant to talk about the details until we get the trillions. And we heard that message over and over and over again. So just on that front alone, you can smell a hoax. And you can also get into even just the semantics and the phrases they use, like climate change. It used to be global cooling, then it was global warming, now it's climate change. So they've even phrased the terms in such a way where it doesn't matter what actually happens with the environment. They can always be panicking about something. So these are the things that we have to be talking about and considering. But I'll end it with this and let you guys ask some questions or take it however you want. But on an encouraging note, I think the United States is actually probably the most informed nation with regards to this hoax, because when you talk to other people from around the world, they have absolutely no idea what the alternative opinion or alternative argument to climate change is. They've never even heard it. They just always have heard global warming, global cooling, something's going on, we need to act now. At least when you talk to the Americans, even the American people who have, bought the lie and have drank the Kool-Aid, they at least understand that there are people who disagree, and they kind of understand at least some of the baseline points for why they disagree. So in America, we have a huge advantage to combating this, but it's going to take getting our legislators on board to actually cut the funding, because that's what's kept this beast alive for so long.
Yeah, this is all like insane to me that like what do they even need $20 trillion for? Because it's been nice. I didn't have to do a ton of research for this episode because you and Alex already did all the research, so I could just read the research that you guys already did. And but it's still shocking to read about, okay, we need $20 trillion, we need $1.6 trillion a year from the West for reparations to give to disadvantaged countries like China. In one of these articles, it says that like China is a developing nation, that they need climate reparations, which is insane on so many levels. Like, it obviously sounds like money laundering to me, but at the same time, even if you do give these, like, let's not even say China, these third world countries a bunch of money, that doesn't actually help them. That's just going to create an artificial boom in their resources, which means their population is going to explode without the institutions to back up the new standard of living that they have. And then as soon as that money dries up, they're going to once again be demanding more reparations from the West for climate injustice. Like, you just stick the word climate in front of everything, and it's like putting natural in front of natural flavors. Like, there's nothing natural about it. You stick climate in front of something just to make it sound nice, and that just means you have to give us more money now. But it's like, what do they spend? What do they need this money for? What do they spend it on? Like you said, they got $1.3 trillion this time, which is not enough. Where's that money even going? What are they using it on?
Well, it's a little bit of a mystery, and that's a part of the hoax, because it's not actually going to go towards effectively changing the climate. They're going to transfer it to what they call the global south, and they kept saying that over and over again. I actually got one guy on tape who was Marxist Soviet European, or European, depending on your position on the poor folks over there. But he was saying we need, $5 trillion for the global south because we need to pay the reparations. And I was like, wait, hold on. What's the money going to go to? And we asked that to a handful of activists, and they said, well, the money's going to go to like solar panels and windmills and this, that, and the other. But it's like, okay. But like, who's transferring the money? Who's going to take the money from the taxpayer? Who's going to transfer that money to the global south? Who's going to decide who's buying or contracting the windmills or the solar panels? Or like, let's get specific here, because you're just asking for carte blanche, massive amounts of money that we don't have, by the way, and then you're just going to use it to save the planet. It doesn't make any sense. Like, actually spell out a plan here. But the thing is, there is no plan. But a handful of people were at least honest, and they said, well, the World Bank will handle the money, right? The United States can give the money to the World Banks, and the World Banks can redistribute it to the impoverished nations, and the impoverished nations, will do the right thing and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. So now we're actually getting to the heart of the issue, because the World Bank is not accountable at all to the U.S. taxpayer or to United States elected representatives, or even to the people in which the money would be going to. So around all of these solutions that they come up with, there's some sort of a global element that plays a role in it, whether it be the global bank being the transfer of money, whether it be the United Nations setting the agenda for all of these countries and their processes and their climate goals. No matter what, it has some sort of globalist tie to it. So when you start poking on that button and you start pinching that bear, you recognize that they don't have a plan for the money going to the nations. They don't even have a plan for what the money will be spent on. It's just get the money, give it to the UN, get the money, give it to the World Bank. And I think that this is more about funding globalism than it is about funding climate change, because the UN has 1/3 of its budget staked in the United States, over 1/3 of it actually, and its headquarters are in the United States, as we all know. So if that went away, which is not out of the realm of possibility, they could be crippled because they're already struggling. So they need money and they need it fast. So if they can get the gullible fools in the West to give trillions and the World Bank can hold it, you can only imagine what's going to happen with offshore accounts and quid pro quo and insider trading. And, oh, we'll spend a little bit of money on windmills and solar panels, but we're going to create this company and contract the money to this company. And the owners and beneficiaries of this company are these globalist leaders or these globalist kleptocrats. And it's just all about feeding the beast. So they would not be open at all to any sort of grassroots climate effort. They wouldn't like that at all because it subverts the UN's authority. It subverts the globalist authority. And we even observed that with the way they structured the conference. They have a blue zone and a green zone. And the blue zone is like where the delegates and the official people who represent countries meet and do official presentations and things like that. And then the green zone's kind of like the activist zone, if you will. That's where, maybe Greenpeace would be set up, or an organization like RFK Jr.'s Waterkeepers Alliance, or maybe, Greta Thunberg's 501c3 or something like that. They would have a booth in this green zone. That green zone no longer welcomes those sort of grassroots organizations. When you go into the green zone now, it's Citibank, it's Dominion Energy, it's insert big financial corporation, it's this investment firm that focuses on climate. Big business, big corporations have taken over even the activism side of these events. So when you link it all together, they really don't care about getting the work done or coming up with good solutions. Another funny example of this was when we landed at the airport. They had these QR codes up everywhere, and it said scan to offset your carbon footprint. And I thought, well, this will be funny. So, I scanned the QR code, and it says it has you insert your flight number and stuff. So I did it, and it said that we owed $115 to compensate for what we had just emitted. And I'm like, okay, so what is, like you asked, Mason, what is this money going to go to? So I actually looked into it. Like, maybe it's going to go to Greenpeace and save some whales, or maybe it's going to go to Greta Thunberg so she can buy a new raincoat and stand outside in London, or maybe it's going to do something positive. But it just went straight to the UN. It just went straight to the UN. It was just like, hey, offset your climate by making a great donation to the United Nations. So what are they going to do with that? Well, they said, they even had an FAQ. They said, don't worry, it's going to go to highly effective climate initiatives. What are those? Well, they won't say. It doesn't matter, because it's just going to go straight into the pockets of people like Antonio Guterres, the leader of the United Nations, who was the former leader of Socialist International. So it doesn't matter what goes on in the earth. They just want the money, and they just want the money fast. So the United States, unfortunately, isn't completely on board with this, but the unfortunate part comes in where there's a lot of people in Republican Congress who actually are very interested in continuing the climate deal. There was 5 Republican congressmen who came to COP. Unfortunately, we didn't know they were attending. Otherwise, we would have come and harassed them politely and stuck a camera in their face. But they showed up last minute, no announcement, and they put up a pop-up press conference actually the day we left, which is kind of funny that we were at the airport when we found out they were setting up their press conference. And they did a whole 30-minute presentation on how the U.S. is going to continue sustainability, and we're going to continue doing the green stuff, and we're going to continue moving away from oil. But they said we could never fully phase it out. So they do this leg on one side of the fence, approach where they try to please everybody. And that was Republican Congress critters.
Now, what 5? We need name names. What 5 Republican Congress critters do we need to be paying attention to for this?
Okay, I'll pull it up here since you
Okay.
asked. But we have at least the one I know off the top of my head who was the leader of it was August Pfluger. He is from Texas. He was really the main ringleader of this whole thing. And it's funny because August Pfluger actually represents a big oil group, big oil constituency in Texas. So you had Troy Balderson from Ohio. You had Morgan Griffith from Virginia, John James of Michigan, Jay Olbernolt of California, August Pfluger. And then you even had a couple Democrats, Edward Markey, Sheldon Whitehouse. And these were the people who were pushing climate change. But the big shocker, of course, were Balderson, Griffith, James, Olbernolt, and then August Pfluger, who were your GOP representatives there pushing climate change. And when we first heard that there was going to be a GOP delegation at COP, we thought, oh, this is going to be so great. They're going to come in. They're going to say there's a new sheriff in town. Donald Trump's not going to give any money to you guys. The climate hoax is over. Pack your bags, go home. But instead, they did what I communicated. They said, you know what? Yeah, phasing out oil, it's not going to happen. Impossible. But sustainability is achievable. We need to consider these ways of pursuing renewable energies, etc. And they walked the line. Even Viktor Orban, who I really like, leader of Hungary, somebody who's been called the Donald Trump of that part of the world, he came to COP and said, yes, we can't phase out farmers, we can't phase out oil, but we need to be sustainable. We need to go green. We need to focus on solar, wind, etc. So we have a lot of work to do. Lee Zeldin, Donald Trump's EPA pick, he was actually a part of, I believe, a 22 delegation group of Republicans in Congress that were Republicans for climate. And the Republicans who believe in climate change. Lee Zeldin was a part of that caucus. Donald Trump selected him to be the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Not an incredible pick, but then you also have people like Chris Wright, who are leading I believe he is the Secretary of Energy now, or at least the appointee to be. And he is very against the climate change hoax. He's even made PragerU videos going out against the climate hoax. So there's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad, but the bottom line is there's still a lot of work to do, even with people who we think are on our side on this issue, because I don't know if they have just sold out or if they really believe there's something wrong with the planet or if they're just trying to play politics. I don't know what their rationale is. But when you start to pander to this whole oil is bad, CO2 is bad, we need to move away from it, even using the words fossil fuels, it plays into the agenda that oil and gas and the usage of them are bad, because they're not. I mean, let's actually talk about this. Using oil and using gas are not bad things. These are natural resources. They're God-given resources. They are a gift of God. And actually the president of this COP, President Aliyev of Azerbaijan, he opened up the COP by saying oil was a gift of God. And he's right. You cannot wear any clothes hardly without using oil. You can't get to work without using oil. You can't wear glasses without using oil. You can't have anything plastic without using oil. You can't have anything metal without using oil. We can't continue to move forward as a society unless we want to return to the Stone Age, unless we embrace oil and gas. And the sad reality is solar panels, wind, that kind of stuff, it's just not feasible. It doesn't matter how you slice it. It doesn't matter how you implement it. It's always going to cost more. It's always going to produce less. And it actually harms the environment. I mean, we've had Donald Trump go on Joe Rogan saying windmills create bird cemeteries where tons of birds lie dead on the ground around them, that they pollute the atmosphere, that they hurt whales. Solar panels require cutting down trees and ruining beautiful forests to implant just seas of steel and glass. I mean, these things are not pro-environment. What we need to be talking about is don't litter, don't dump oil in the ocean, don't put toxic chemicals in the river. Those are things we can talk about that are actually effective, positive discussions on protecting the environment. Also referred to in the past as just good stewardship. But this whole mentality of we need to get rid of the things that made civilization successful with regards to industry is just nonsense. And when you click into it even deeper, when you start touching on the CO2 debate, and they say zero CO2 emissions, the funny part, the not so funny part perhaps, that people don't follow through with is, wait, zero CO2 emissions would require the literal death of every single human being on the planet, including every single animal and every single plant. So what are you advocating for exactly? Is it the end of humanity and the end of civilization? Because that's what I end up taking away from it, because CO2 is the gas of life. And if you want to get rid of it, then you want to get rid of people. We exhale roughly 2 pounds of it a day. So these are the sort of questions that aren't asked that should be. And we did confront a handful of people at COP and tried to ask questions like that. And we can touch on a couple of those interactions in particular if you'd like. But when you pull back the curtain and have a Wizard of Oz moment, you recognize, hold on a second, this really has nothing to do with what you say you're trying to achieve. It actually has everything to do with the revolution. And that's that famous quote, the issue's never the issue is always the revolution. And that's what is going on here.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting parts of this, just kind of bringing it back, which, I mean, by the way, welcome folks to just in a nutshell, the entire climate crisis that we're dealing with, quote unquote, climate crisis, is really just a shell game for moving money around. That's the thing, though. It's looking at the actual practical applications of the Trump administration coming in. One of the big distinctions, and for the sake of this this portion of the conversation, I'm removing necessarily who it is that's being installed again. Lee Zeldin, I enjoyed him potentially at the head of the RNC, but not at the head of the EPA. There's a few of those folks that I have some question marks about, and that's putting it lightly. But what the Trump administration coming in has to do, ultimately, we would love to just say, instead of looking at the Paris Agreement or anything else specifically, just get us out of the UN. Get out altogether. And I think there's a resounding cheer of a lot of people across the nation when I say just get us out. But we talk about the Paris Agreement. The reality is, and you mentioned it earlier, Andrew, this is not just the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accords that need to be pulled out of. Trump pulled us out. Biden put us back. Trump might pull us out again. What we want, though, what informed citizens ought to be asking for from their government, making noise about, is to remove us entirely from what's the bigger framework, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. That's a treaty level thing. Am I right there, Andrew? That is a treaty level document from 1992, I think it was signed. And from that springs the Paris Agreement and all kinds of other stuff. These are all just subsidiaries. We really need to go back to the root of this because, to your point, we could have two separate discussions. We could talk about conservation and stewardship versus environmentalism, what phrase you want to use, what you mean by that. That's why when RFK Jr. talks about his environmental activism, most of it I listen and go,
well,
yeah, cool.
It's real environmental activism.
Right. I would call it conservation. You would call it environmentalism, but we're, don't pollute the rivers. Stop putting bad things in our food. Let's all be healthier and enjoy what God gave us. Yes, absolutely. There's a whole section of people that take it further than that. The net zero emissions, which is perniciously still involved in the Republican Party. Doug Burgum for Secretary of the Interior. I asked Greg Wrightstone over at the CO2 Coalition, and he said, no, I like him. He's conservative on a lot of things, but he still believes or has bought into the net zero carbon agenda, which so many people, like you said, Viktor Orban, everyone else, well, we can't get rid of fossil fuels. But of course, no, stop couching it. Just say there's a way to run all of these things cleanly, but what you're describing isn't that. Then we shift to the second, and in my opinion, the huge part of the conversation. This just becomes the entire climate summit, climate treaties, climate business model has become what we see. And I mean, you think Solyndra, 2011, what we're doing, shifting money around. Is anyone actually manufacturing, a decent set of solar panels that are going to actually make an impact on green energy? No, it's not about that. It's not about any of the energy concerns or any of the climate concerns. This is just like a whole industry that is built up around shifting money and power and influence. And we all kind of know that. It seems like at the UN climates, unlike here in the US, where people keep at a fever pitch this green agenda, at the UN events, that just kind of melts away. And the real agenda of just shifting money around and no one really bothers to try to even excuse where it comes from or where it goes. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew. That seems to just be right under the surface level at the UN. We're here in the US, at least it gets buried beneath layers, and I say at least, from the left's perspective, it gets buried beneath layers of actual but not real care about the environment and the world and blah, blah, blah. At the UN, it's like, yeah, we all know why we're here. Like, none of this is actually about cleaning up the environment. It seems like it's just kind of out in the open, and yet we still use the word climate every once in a while. Am I wrong there? Or is that just that level is right there at surface level at these UN events, much more so than when we get into US politics and the climate crazies?
No, you're right. And that's exactly what happens. And that's a part of the reason why no one reports on these things. And that's a part of the agenda for hiding it. Because I think if the media actually showed up and started asking some questions like, what are you going to do with the trillions? What are you going to do to save the planet? Like, wait, no. Don't use buzzwords. Don't just do this whole solar panel windmill thing. Like, actually tell us what the plan is. They would have no answer, right? And if you actually asked, well, how are you going to transfer the money? What are you going to do here? There would be no answer. And I think the American people would sniff out the hoax. So instead, they want to indoctrinate the kids at a young level, teach them that people are bad, having more people on the earth, increasing birth rates, all that's bad. Driving a car that runs on gas, bad. Just basic surface level indoctrination. They want to do that. And then they want to host these conferences where the elites come and decide what's best for us, and we give them a whole bunch of money, and it's far away and nobody pays attention to it. Nobody reports on it because it's the experts and they handle all of this for us. So graciously, actually, we're lucky to have them, right? And that's what they want us to think. So you're right. That is what happens. But the answer to it, as is the answer with our constitutional problem here in the United States, where people aren't following the Constitution, as is the issue with our federal debt and all of these issues we talk about, inflation, when it comes to issues we have with weaponization of lawfare or weaponization of law to create lawfare, all these topics we talk about in the United States politics, the answer to those, as is the answer with climate, is education. We have to educate people to smell out the hoax, to smell out the lies, and to be able to think and do for themselves. And if Americans were just articulate in a few basic areas when it comes to climate, the whole house of cards would fall down. Because it's like you said, when you look at Robert F. Kennedy and his conservation efforts, you see things that are actually effective. And you say, yeah, of course I would be for getting trash out of the ocean. Of course I'd be for, not wasting food, or of course I'd be for being healthy. But people don't necessarily have an answer for, okay, why exactly is using oil bad, or why exactly are windmills and solar panels not effective alternatives? And then when you get into just even the news and geopolitical element of it, and you see China being labeled as a developing nation, and you see China being lifted up as this climate god, and they say, look at how well, they lie at these UN conferences, and they say China is beating the US in climate efforts. Well, there's graphs in a lot of our articles and reporting for the New American that show actually the US's CO2 and carbon emissions are lower than China's, because they make coal-fired power plants multiple times a week, and we're getting rid of those things. And there's an agenda behind that as well, to weaken the US when it comes to energy independence and when it comes to our military. So once you pull all of this back, you see that there's an anti-Western agenda and there's an anti-human agenda, and they want to take our money while killing us. And that's something that Trump's hit on. And there are tons of clips of Trump saying climate change is a hoax. Climate change is a disaster. It's not real. And I think that he truly believes that. But, I got to give him some credit. I was hating on Lee Zeldin and I was hating on some of his picks, but there is an element of Trump where he picks dynamic characters in his cabinet. He picks somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, and then he picks somebody like Mike Waltz of Florida, who's been a little bit more of a war hawk. He kind of does this thing where he picks people on different sides of issues within the same sphere, because he, I think in a true sense, controls his cabinet. I think he has a lot more power over his cabinet, or at least he's going to try to in his second term. So when you see somebody like Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, I don't get as nervous about that, because I don't think he's going to be perhaps as powerful Secretary of State as our current one is. So I think that Donald Trump still has the right position on climate, still has the right position on this hoax. But we have to put pressure on Congress and we have to put pressure on the Senate to say, look, getting out of the Paris Agreement is not enough, because that can be undone with a pen in a day if the White House flips. But the UNFCCC, you're going to have that go through the Senate all over again, and people are going to be talking about it. Receipts are going to be thrown up. Budgets are going to be reviewed, and that will be very exposing. Getting out of the United Nations, even better. So those are the kind of reframings that we need to have, kind of refining our rhetoric here of how we talk about these issues. It's not enough just to focus on why this is a hoax, but you also have to focus on what the root cause is, and that is the United Nations and getting us out of it. And just that alone would cripple this whole thing for potentially decades, because nobody else around the world, barring perhaps some of the most liberal parts of Europe, are going to continue this if the United States says, no, that's enough, because Russia and China and most of the Eastern world doesn't really care all that much about clean energy and sustainability and all these sorts of things. It's only the woke, indoctrinated West that's been carrying this around. Think of Justin Trudeau and the carbon tax and everything that's gone on to the north. If the United States could say, that's it, UNFCCC, history, UN, history, we're done. You've wasted our money. You've lied to us long enough. Have a good time. I think the whole thing would cave in. So the Clegxit, the climate exit, really could happen with just us. But it's going to take courage from Donald Trump and pressure from the American people to make it happen.
We're going to need to work on that Clegxit phrase. I feel like it's a little clunky. Maybe clunksy? No, it's bad. Well, it's okay. We'll help. We'll figure something out with you. Mason, did you see about the whale?
The fake whale?
I heard you said something about saving the whales. Andrew, we have to ask, out of all of the social media phenomenon that came out of COP29, for those of us who were paying attention, the whale from the Caspian Sea has to be my favorite. Did you guys see the fake whale?
We went and saw the fake whale, and there's pictures and videos, and we actually interviewed some people. And this is funny, and maybe we should have led with this because it's the story that most people have been intrigued with. They had this whale that they put up on the Caspian Sea, a sperm whale, 52 feet long. I'd read about it in CNN and MSNBC. They did some articles, and they said why thousands of people are gathering around a 52-foot sperm whale. And, they pitched it when you read the article as it's an art display. It's to draw attention to climate change. It's this really brave expression of activism. So we were expecting it to be just that, an art display. We could go and take some pictures of it, maybe film some B-roll. It'd be a fun thing, kind of unique. So we show up, and it looks like a crime scene. They got these gates around the whale. There's, vehicles, trailers, tents. And I'm like, whoa, this is quite the scene. And so we walk up, all these Azerbaijani people around it. And they're these scientists, and they're wearing white lab coats. They've got a seal on their shirt, and there's a Jeep, and the Jeep has the same seal on it. And there's a trailer, and the trailer has the same seal on it. I'm like, what in the world? So I walk up, and it says IWA, International Whale Association. I'm like, what? So I'd never heard of that. So then you walk up, and it smells awful. It smells like a rotting whale. I'm like, wow, that's pretty bad. And then you look at the whale, and there's like real looking blood dripping down the side of it. And these scientists are extracting things from the whale. And I'm like, wow, they're really working on this to make this look real. So we're taking some pictures, we're taking some videos. And then this Azerbaijani lady walks up, and, one of the scientists come up to the gate, and they start talking with the crowd. And I'm like, wow, this is more than I thought it would be. So the scientist lady starts saying, yeah, we found him 3 days ago. We're trying to figure out the cause of death. We're taking test samples. We're sending them back to Belgium. We're trying to discover the cause of death for this poor whale. We believe it's climate change, that the changing temperatures redirected him into the Caspian Sea, and that he beached here. And it's just a really tragic display. And we saw people walking away genuinely believing it was real. They had these scientists doing this. And you have to recognize that a whole bunch of the internet resources you and I and Mason use daily are blocked in Azerbaijan. You can't go to Rumble on Azerbaijan. It's blocked. You can't go to many mainstream conservative news sites in Azerbaijan. It's just blocked. It doesn't matter. You just can't get to it. So I still think that many of those people believed it was real. So we start to interview one of the scientists. What are you doing here? Who are you with? IWA, we're taking these tests. This poor whale, they're acting like it's real. So we poke them and let them do the little bit. And at the end, we're like, how can people learn more about your organization? Give us some resources. And they're like, the internet's a great place. You can look up whales. You can look up IWA. And we're like, no, but like, what's your website? What's your name? Give us some specifics. And they're like, the internet's great. Look it up. You can learn a lot. So we cut the interview. And the guy says to me, he's like, why don't you guys, you're journalists from America, right? And we're like, yeah. It's like, why don't you guys come into the trailer with me and we'll talk a little bit. So we're like, okay. So he opens the gate. We walk into the trailer, and he wouldn't let us touch him, by the way, like shake his hand or anything. He didn't want to get whale bacteria on us. So we had to like clip the mic on him and all this. He was really thorough. So we get into the trailer. He takes off the gloves. He shakes our hands. He's like, I'm not a scientist. I'm actually a jazz pianist. And, that's a fake whale. So he like spills the beans on us. And we knew the whole time it was fake, but he was like having an intervention. He's like, it's fake. It's fake. It's fake. So we're like, oh, okay. So he grabs a piece of sheet music because he's a jazz pianist. He's like, I'll give you some information so you can just like look into what we do because it's really cool. So he's like, gives us the website. It's called Captain Boomer Collective. And he's like, this is the guy who made the whale. Here are some of our past stunts. And then this was the beautiful part. He said, don't put any of this in the video. Otherwise, people might find out it's a hoax. So, of course, the first thing we did was we put Captain Boomer Collective on the video and did the exact opposite and exposed it. But that was just one of the funny things where you look at this and they don't have any facts on their sides. They don't have any real things. So they have to create a fake whale. And I have found from multiple sources that the Azerbaijani government worked with this individual to make this possible. They very well could have been paid to have done it. It was a certified COP, protest demonstration. But these poor people never found out that it was a fake whale. They never heard the truth. No one reported it as like, this real art display that they were really trying to convince people it was a whale. Like in the American media, it was all painted as like kind of this cute activism and art. But unfortunately to the people there, they walked away thinking it was real. So that was just one of the fun stories where it's very emblematic of the whole process that, there are actually no whales in the Caspian Sea. It's actually a lake. It's not a sea. There's no connection to the ocean at all. So there's no way a whale, unless you took one out of the ocean and put it in the Caspian Sea. I mean, it's like impossible. It's not even geographically, possible for a whale.
No, this whale gets around. There's many past beachings if you go and look at the Captain Boomer website. It's been in Greenwich. It's been in Spain, Holland, Belgium a couple of times, Germany, France, Poland, Austria. It looked very nice on the cobblestone sides there of I believe we're in France. Right behind a cathedral. It was beautiful, a work of art.
So
truly.
It wasn't dead. It was just taking a nap before it started to travel again.
It was
another disconnected body of water.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
That's right.
Wow.
That's insane.
So they set these things up and they try to make games and try to confuse people. And it even says on their website, their hope is to stir and mobilize a community to action because their natural system has been disrupted by a beaching of a whale, and it's a special experience and this, that, and the other. So, they don't even talk about, we asked them about actual threats to whales, like windmills. Anywhere a windmill is placed, whales have a 400% increase in chances of death. But they didn't know anything about that. Of course, windmills are great in their eyes. So, that was a funny hoax.
Jazz pianists and artists.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What are they going to know about windmills anyway?
But there's a tone.
No.
You should know this, musician man. There's a tone to the it drives
right.
the whales nuts.
That's right.
Man.
Well, I mean that like those Azerbaijani people like genuinely believing that's real. That just stokes resentment against the West in their minds because they're thinking when they walk away like, oh, these big Western powers that they're so selfish and they do all this pollution and they're so selfish and they're killing animals, and then this like disgusting stinky animal washes up on our shore. Just so happens to be at the exact same time that the UN conference shows up. But in their minds, that's stoking resentment against America and against Europe, and that's really insidious the way they're doing that, where they're like psyoping people in in the global South, as they call it, into hating us.
Well, let me ask this, Andrew, and then also, I mean, Mason, you chime in too. One of the interesting things, much like kind of unlike here in the U.S. where it's buried, this nasty globalist agenda, exchange of money and power is all it really is. It's buried beneath altruism of the media here in the U.S. But of course, like I said, it's real close to the surface. You get to the UN conferences, it's not like anyone's trying very hard to maintain the facade. It's just there. This is all how we move money and power around the world. This is one of the places we do that. So with that effect happening between the difference between here in the U.S., our conversations, and there at these climate summits, what's up with China trying to pretend, and you referenced this before, China comes to these things and tries to, oh my gosh, we're a developing nation. We don't have nearly the burden or the responsibility that the first world does because we're a developing nation. And you look at them economically and say, no, you're not. There's no more. You all have almost surpassed, economically speaking, some of the rest of us. And also, by the way, it is China and India largely. There's not trash in the ocean because of the United States. There's trash in the ocean because of China and India and a lot of other nations. It's not us that are killing the turtles and the whales. But is it really, does anyone at these UN conferences actually buy it? Is China just giving off their horse feathers and trying to hope that people believe it? Or what's the effect there? Because people here, I don't think anyone actually really thinks in that effect of, I don't feel like I see that in other places. China trying to pull off the same, oh, poor woe is us. But at the climate conferences, all of a sudden they do, where they're one of the grossest offenders. Does anyone buy that? Or does everyone really know the truth and the facade is pretty thin as well on that?
I think the Western people recognize that, but everybody else doesn't. Most of the Europeans would buy into that and say that China's better, that China's the model. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum has said that China is the model for not just climate, but also for the whole Great Reset and the New World Order. A lot of people look up to them, believe it or not, in the Eastern world and in Europe, not because of truth, but because of lies that they've been sold about the country and about how they have structured their economy and everything. They have pitched this lie that they're somehow green or sustainable when that's not even true at all. But to answer your question, this does cut to an interesting observation that I made because I'd never been to one of these. It was the first time I ever went. Alex has been to like 15 or something crazy of these. But I asked him and he confirmed most of the people, like the NGOs, the small little delegations that countries send of activists and that kind of thing, when you talk to them, they're extremely nice and they're extremely sincere. And they really do think that what they are pushing is true. Like they really do buy into all of this. They would buy into China being a good example. They'd buy into the West being these evil polluters. They'd buy into Al Gore's whole pitch about, rising sea levels and everything. But then when you talk to some of the higher up people, like we talked to the second in command at the WHO, we talked to the former leader of the United Nations Environmental Program, which is kind of like the UN's version of the EPA. When you start pushing them, you can tell they don't buy it. Like you can tell they understand it's a hoax. Of course, they'll never say that, but they don't have any substantive answers. And then the conversation pitches from climate to what they would call multilateralism, which is a synonym for globalism. So there's like two tiers. There's the useful idiots, if you will, the genuine believers, the people who would totally buy into all of that. They're sincere. And then there are the string pullers at the top who truly know, like, you know what, if we went solar, we can't go to Bilderberg on our jets, or we can't go to, the Bohemian Grove or whatever, whatever they're doing. I'm being a little facetious here, but they recognize that their way of life and everything wouldn't be sustainable if they followed through with this. But what they care about is multilateral organization and multilateral cooperation between the nations. And they see that as the existential threat. And when you even poke some of them about climate change, they'll start to call it a health crisis. And they'll say, you know what, climate change is a human rights issue. Climate change is a health issue. Climate change is a spiritual issue. I mean, they tie it to everything possible, but it always goes back to what they call multilateralism, which is global cooperation between nations. So no matter who you talk to, they're going to push the climate stuff first. But once you get to those upper level people and you start poking, it shifts, and it's no longer consists of talking about climate solutions. Then it starts talking about sustainability and multilateralism and, nations cooperating, et cetera. So, hopefully that answers the question a little bit, but, I don't believe for a second that Bill Gates or, the Secretary General of the United Nations or Al Gore or Leonardo DiCaprio or some of these people who are really high up, like, the big names who push this kind of stuff. I think they understand that what they're pushing really isn't about the climate. It's really about the global control. Mm-hmm. And you know what? If we can use this as a transition to get us to where we need to go, the ends justify the means, and it was a success. So I really think that that's the temperature of what these people think. And ultimately, if they were exposed for that, the whole house of cards would come crumbling down. But that's where the education element needs to kick in.
Well, there's also like a kind of a Caligula's horse situation where China's influence in the global economy is so widespread, both in the developing world and in the United States. With Microsoft, like how dependent is Microsoft on China for everything business related? All sorts of parts for their computers or like mines or like even China's influence in places like Africa where they're responsible for trade and resource extraction and all that kind of stuff. Like you can't call China's BS, because if you do that, like you get poor because you're cut off. It's kind of similar to back in 2020 with the Hong Kong stuff. It's like even celebrities couldn't call out this like obvious liberation situation because what's his name, the Michael Jordan in the NBA, was that the guy that was like he couldn't talk about it because the NBA is so tied into to China and those business interests are so interconnected.
I would love to fact check you on that, but I'm a baseball guy, so I have absolutely no idea.
Well, there was some big basketball star that was playing defense for China back in 2020 during the Hong Kong situation.
You're not talking about no, it's not Dennis Rodman. He was jaunting around North Korea and people.
No, this was like one of the big ones.
Andrew, you got anything for us? We know you're sports master over there.
I have heard. When you were talking about that, I thought about what's his name, John Cena. You remember John Cena? Everything that happened. That came to my mind, but I don't know exactly with the basketball thing. But it does bring up a point that you have movies that can't criticize China. You remember Top Gun, the latest Top Gun. He had the Taiwanese flag on his jacket or whatever, and there was the whole controversy around that. But it's definitely a sacred cow that you can't touch, otherwise the funding will be cut.
Right, exactly. And so like Leonardo DiCaprio, it's like if he has to do the dance and sing the song, otherwise he's not going to get another call from the production agencies to
Here he is on they gave us this magazine, UN magazine, Leonardo DiCaprio climate champion. There he is on there. Champion. So he probably got a good amount of money and love for doing that and taking one for the cause. But they use these people as total frontmen to push the goal that they have, which is hilarious. I mean, it's just unbelievable. This body, more than any other gathering in human history, now faces this difficult but achievable task, DiCaprio said at the UN while wearing his UN pin.
I bet he probably doesn't care or like lose sleep about any of that because
he's done enough. Like he's already been mauled by a bear, so he's taken a beating from he's taken a beating from nature, and he's taken a lick for us. I'm kidding. That's a joke, folks. That's The Revenant. That's a movie. This is where really what it comes down to, and I guess the bottom line here to wrap us up. Which I'm actually going to have to wrap us up or my computer battery is going to die because I didn't think to plug this in and it's running the whole show. But we are at an hour and want to respect people's time. Bottom line, you and I and Mason and Andrew, everyone, we have the responsibility from the bottom up to speak the truth about this, to understand what's going on, because so many people are either just useful idiots bought into it or are being paid by it. And whether they know better or not, they're never going to stop the cash cow from rolling. but it's going to require mass understanding and red pilling at the bottom. You and me, all of us normies out here. Well, we're not the normies, we're the red pillars. But you and I are going to have to red pill our normie friends on this so that they understand that the climate agenda is in fact a hoax, that the front side of it that's being fed to you, but behind it is this globalist, multilateral, whatever you want to call it, money laundering scheme, essentially, where we just run power and influence and money around the world. And this is one of the facades. None of these people actually care about it because there isn't science to support it. It's just something that they use to maintain power, money, influence, and control, and to get us all running around, not paying attention to them and bringing accountability, but instead letting them to their own devices. That's where it's got to come. Bottom line, we have to. Where can people continue to read you guys' research? Because there's more. I saw articles, tons of videos. Andrew, tell everyone where they can find all of that you and Alex did in Azerbaijan a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And I would encourage people to go and check out the reporting and the articles and the videos, because it's tough to compact, a week's worth of observations and, analysis in an hour. So if you're interested in this, go to thenewamerican.com. That's thenewamerican.com. Also, a lot of that is syndicated. And then further coverage of COP in ways of Alex giving interviews and talking about it with various people can be found at thelibertysentinel.org. That's Liberty Sentinel. It's sentinel.org. Would appreciate people also subscribing to the New American magazine, which the next print edition is going to be on COP29. And I have a cover story there, as does Alex Newman. So we will click into the funding and what was spent, how it was spent, who was there, what they said, what the U.S. did, what they didn't do, the Trump effect. We talk about the whale, all of it and more at thenewamerican.com. So
this is why you need to be subscribed on unauthorizedcaucus.com, because otherwise you're going to have to squeegee back through the video and get those links again, or you could just be subscribed on unauthorizedcaucus.com and we will email those links to you and make your lives way easier.
Yep, you'll know where to go and do it, and you'll see it tomorrow when this comes out. Make sure you go and subscribe. Hit the big green subscribe button on Rumble, like the video, share it with a friend. Go to our sponsor, TrexInc.com. Give them some love. Use your promo code Caucus30. There's some new stuff. I was just talking with the owners there yesterday. They have some really cool stuff coming down the pike. Hats, apparel, mugs.
Can they make a Clegzit shirt?
A Clegzit shirt? I will put that request in. We'll see what we can do. We got customization options. I got my own custom little mug right here.
Yeah, we've inspired more than a few.
We've inspired a few. We'll see. We'll get you some Clegzit stuff. TrexInc.com, Caucus30. And of course, the New American at Andrew1Muller on X, libertysentinel.org. Is that the right one? Libertysentinel.org? Yeah,
that's right.
Libertysentinel.org. You guys know where to go, what to do. And as always, if you remember nothing else, unauthorizedcaucus.com, and we will link to all of the goodies. I think that's it for us this week. Andrew, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it so much. Internet, thank you for not breaking because we had all three of us on one screen at the same time. But that's that, folks. We will send everything out tomorrow, and then we'll talk to you next week. If it's Thursday, it's noon.
It's caucus time.
It's caucus time. Have a good week, everyone.